All right, we just finished talking about color separation. We talked about spot illustration. We talked about type design. We talked about poster layout. And our final project that I will grade, that's the final 3-point assignment of the semester, portfolio project, is really the easiest one to understand. It's the digital painting assignment. Now, just like I've had exhaustive explanations of digital coloring, exhaustive explanations of CMYK color separation, I have an exhaustive explanation of digital painting. So I'll get into that. There are also some other resources that you might be interested in, especially if you liked some of the presentations we saw from students on character design, on concept art, or a more finished kind of cover art and illustration that was digitally painted. How is it different than digital coloring? You know how I like to use Wonder Woman in these. So this is a digital painting of Wonder Woman, right? And how is it different than all the other images of Wonder Woman we've seen? All the other images of Wonder Woman we've seen have been based on line art. And then the coloring, the texturing, the halftoning, all of that was done underneath outline, line art, right? Even sometimes when the outline gets removed. But digital painting is much more about shape language. So this is a digital painting just done without any sketch at all, just done with brushstroke shapes, and then kind of trimmed out with the lasso. This is a digital painting more traditionally done on top of sketched lines, but never clean line art. And the reason it's the simplest process we'll learn all semester is really, it's just you make pixels. You have full control of the pixels. You don't get them from anywhere else. And you just play with pixels. You can layer them if you want. You can do them all in one layer if you want. Digital painters work in a lot of different ways. These are the kind of methods I generally show students. There's two kind of very different approaches. One is called shape painting, and I sometimes just call it speed painting because you'll often see it in concept artists who don't want to spend a lot of time like building up an image. And it just starts immediately with shape language, just using big blobs of brushed pixel color, and then it refines it slowly over time. And notice it will sometimes trim out the edges as well. And then the other type is based on a sketch of some sort and then built with pixels on top of the sketch. And you see how they use the lasso at the end to kind of trim it out. Now, what you're going to be asked to paint for this project, we save it for the very end because you have to use a tablet for it. You need that pressure sensitivity. It's really treating the computer screen like it's your canvas, and you get to we'll be customizing our own brushes next class, and but you need something to paint, right? So we need to be observing something and doing our own painted version of it. It can be stylized, but we need to look at something that's three-dimensional, or at least the illusion of three-dimensional, so that we understand light source and edge, because we can't use outlines around things. So I used a reference photo of the author James Joyce, and I did this digital painting. And one way you can think of it is, do you want to try to match reality? That would be a representational painting style. These terms come from art theory, they come from art appreciation and art history. So representational is you paint it in such a way that you want it to match reality. I would say this is representational, even though the colors are kind of weird, because all the proportions, the likeness, it's meant to look like that person, right? And you can either do a portrait of a person from the shoulders up, or you can do an animal from head to toe. Abstraction is another kind of way you can stylize your digital painting. It's where you exaggerate certain things. You can think of it as caricature. You can think of it as just being more experimental with your mark making. And you just don't want to abstract it so much that it no longer looks like a recognizable thing, if that makes sense. That gets into, that's still painting, but that isn't going to be a portrait or an animal anymore. That's just going to be a collection of cool marks. So you can abstract either subtly, or you can abstract severely, but it should always be at least on some edge recognizable to the content that you want it to be. So don't branch all the way into non-representational. Now this is the advantage of digital painting, this all comes from the same digital painting. Because the way I do it, I work it up in layers. And then, just like we've seen with our poster design, with our different assets of spot illustration, of text design, of background, of border, of composite overlays, I can go into Photoshop and turn on and off different layers and get different versions from it. So this is the actual one I ended up publishing and using for a client. And it was just a layering of these different components, certain things turned on, certain things turned off, right? So how to do digital painting? You want to think about blocking your colors. So details matter, but you don't start by painting the details. You paint the vague shape that the details will then be carved out of. So what I do a lot, and this comes from observational drawing as well, you try to work with kind of big shapes first, and you try to squint a lot. So you're not getting exact color, you're getting kind of clear contrast in your color. Squinting helps you differentiate edge and contrast. And in digital painting, unlike digital coloring, it can be pretty blurry. Like the edge control is one of the things we're going to be learning, whether it's a soft edged or a hard edge. And then the finish you get is entirely up to you. Now, we don't get a long time to do it in the class. It can take a long time to do a digital painting. So this is a past student example. They chose to do a portrait of Jack Black, right? So they found their primary photo reference, and then they're just doing their head. But the advantage of digital painting, they started with a sketch, they tried to map it out. You see how the photo reference is tilted, so his first sketch was tilted. And then this ended up being his final painting, which was pretty smoothed out. But the process of digital painting is different than traditional painting. It's not faster. It took about 6 hours for the student to do this. Of course, they're doing it for the first time. But the advantages of it are that you can change things at any level, really at any time, depending on how you set up your layers. So if you look through it again, you'll see that the sketch is starting tilted, it has one shape, that gets filled in, and then at some point he just kind of warps the whole thing, tilts the whole thing to match a proportion he liked better, and then renders it and finishes it on top of that. It also is good to remember that accessories, things like glasses, like piercings, are always tattoos. Those are the things you want to add at the end because they have to go onto kind of a basic shape structure first. And then this is that same student applying those skills for a self-portrait. And again, just having fun with it, right? Finding your own color palette. The color palette he used was based on his favorite piece of clothing. And exaggerating. You see how much smaller his eyes got, playing with caricature. This is a way of abstracting from the photo reference. But you still need the photo reference so that you understand light direction, you understand the edge control, because things don't get to be outlined in digital painting. Now, there are digital painters that use more experimental methods, right? Which I would love to teach you, but this isn't a semester-long digital painting course. But you can use compositing as a basis, and then basically composite brushstrokes, or composite textures as brushstrokes, which this artist uses, both for character design and for setting designs and concepts, which I think is a really cool idea. And then I just use a theme of dragons. I was into dragons making this. There are lots of amazing, digital artists that share lots of their process online. So I just chose, I'm sick of Wonder Woman, a thematic consistency of dragons. Why dragons? Because dragons have like texture to them. Sometimes their colors aren't that interesting, but their textures are, right? And that's ideal for digital painting. And sometimes these artists will really draw them up pretty fully before they paint on top of them. But notice that all those drawn lines get completely overtaken by pixels by the end. That's what makes it digital painting. So in this case, sketch line, then pretty clean line art, very clean line art, which usually you would digitally color behind. And they do that with flat color, with soft edge duotone. But now at that point, they start painting over the line art and it turns into a digital painting. So digital coloring can be part of your process. It just takes a little bit longer. And it's not necessary. This is another one with really clean line art, some concept art for video game design. Because at the end, all that line art disappears. It turns into a textured painting. So Whether you paint on top of that or whether you paint on top of the original sketch doesn't really matter. Everything gets covered. All right. So that's what we're doing. So what do you need to do? You can choose either a person or an animal. And I always think I'm going to do like artists I admire. This is Keith Haring, Jean-Michel Basquiat, and Robert Rauschenberg. I always think I'm going to do them, and I always plan thinking I'm going to use Andy Warhol's Polaroid portraits of these artists, and I'll do my own digital portrait of them. But when push comes to shove, that doesn't interest me in the moment very much. So you have to find something that interests you. And what I decided I wanted to do was Muppets. I thought Muppets would be really fun. And Muppets exist in the real world, right? So I can do Muppets either with just speed painting or shape painting, or I can do Muppets based on a sketch. And because I'm doing a portrait, I'm actually doing a Muppet self-portrait in the other class. So that's my human from the shoulders up. For this class, I'm going to do an animal Muppet, which I'm excited about, because when I was researching references of forgotten Muppets, do any of you remember Barkley? Oh, Barkley's wonderful. And I'm not sure who it belonged to, because it was a Sesame Street thing. So, but Sesame Street and Muppets overlap a lot. So I'm going to do Barkley. This is going to be my primary reference. It's not a great reference. It's pretty low res, right? But I get to add all of my own flair to it. And so it's also good to look for painterly inspiration. So this is an artist that does lots of kind of fan art paintings. This is just with watercolor and ink, but I can be inspired by it. And this is of animal, of course, kind of this ribbon style. And I want to get that kind of energy into my digital painting of Barkley. So I'm going to show you how you set this up. But first of all, you need at least one good primary reference. And the only things you're going to submit for this project, just two requirements. Submit your primary photo reference, though you can have many. And then you submit your finished digital painting just on a white background, right? Whether it's an animal from head to toe or whether it's a portrait. And again, these can be heavily stylized. If we look at the Imgur, we can see even more examples that might get you thinking. So that photo reference becomes this. And we have to work pretty quickly, right? So this is going to be an introduction for many people to digital painting. But sometimes students go back and then they'll add a background and they make it a portfolio piece that they're really proud of. But as long as you can understand the basics of it, you will get your full credit. Because what is digital painting at the end of the day? It's controlling every pixel. I don't know why it says 55. Hopefully it's still recording. It is controlling every pixel and it goes over the top of things. So the reason we do it at the very end is you could take any project we did in this class, compositing, vector, spot illustration, a combination, poster, and you could always digitally paint over the top of it, right? To get certain effects, to do certain finishes. And so you get to choose what you want to challenge yourself with. If you want to do a portrait of your pet, if you want to try to do a portrait of yourself or of a relative. I made this one. This is a Godzilla mask I have. So I did this painting and called it Geekzilla, right? And turned it into a t-shirt as a gift, that kind of thing. This was my dog as a general from the Napoleonic Wars. So this is a great time to kind of experiment with your way of working. So how do we get started? We get started very simply, because it's due pretty soon on our course outline, by putting your name and then posting your first requirement, which is your primary photo reference, which you can change a lot, but you need something to look at light source from. All right, so I'm going to take Barkley from assignment 7, and I'm nicely organized, and I'm going to throw him in there. And then, optional, but I think very helpful, you can use it even if you don't post it, is inspiration. And this can be for painting style.